Harold Jennings had lived in the same quiet corner of Ashwood, Oregon, for over 20 years. He knew every neighbor by name, every dog's bark, and exactly which step on his front porch creaked in the rain. At 68, he liked to think he could spot trouble before it reached his door, but trouble had already moved in, wearing a wedding ring and calling him Dad. It started at a family dinner on a chilly Thursday evening. Megan, Harold's only daughter, had just set the pot roast on the table when her husband, Rick Dalton, leaned back in his chair and casually asked, "So, Harold, that safe you keep upstairs, what kind of lock does it have?" Megan nearly choked on her iced tea. "Rick, what kind of question is that?" she said, half laughing, half scolding, but Rick didn't look away. His eyes stayed locked on Harold's, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Just curious about security," he added smoothly. "With all the break-ins around lately, you can't be too careful." Harold felt a small knot tighten in his chest. Break-ins. In Ashwood. The worst crime here lately had been Mrs. Keating's beagle getting into the church bake sale pies. Still, he played along, answering in short, vague sentences. But as the conversation went on, Rick's questions became sharper about who had keys to the house, about insurance, about what Megan would need to know if anything ever happened. To her father, it was polite table talk on the surface, but in Harold's gut, it felt like the opening move in a game he hadn't agreed to play. After that strange dinner, Harold couldn't quite shake the unease. He'd learned long ago, both as an insurance investigator and as a man who'd seen his share of human nature, that small warning bells rarely rang for no reason. Still, he told himself he might be imagining things. Rick was family now, after all. But later that same evening, something happened that stripped away any lingering doubt. By the time the dishes were done, and Megan had gone upstairs to read, Harold took his time wiping down the counters, letting the steady rhythm of the cloth calm his mind. When he finally headed up to his room, he noticed the first thing out of place. His bedroom door, which he always left shut, was open just a few inches, not wide, just enough to show a sliver of darkness inside. It might have been nothing. But Harold had lived alone long enough to recognize when a space didn't feel right. He stepped in, scanning quickly. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The bed made, lamp in its usual place, his reading glasses on the nightstand. But decades of methodical living had trained his eyes to catch what others might miss. The closet door stood open by about 4 inches. That alone was enough to set his teeth on edge. He always closed it completely. And the drawers of his dresser, normally perfectly flush, were off by just a fraction. The second drawer down, the one where he kept important documents, had a corner of a manila folder sticking out like a yellow flag. He opened it fully. Someone had been thorough but careless. His insurance forms were mixed with bank statements. A will that had always been tucked in the back was now near the front. And worse, much worse, the small brass key he'd kept hidden under the top lip of the drawer with a strip of tape was gone. That key was the manual override to his safe, the same safe Rick had brought up over dinner with feigned casualness. Harold checked twice. Running his fingertips along the underside of the wood, feeling only the faint, sticky residue where the tape had been, the spot was empty. He stood there, gripping the edge of the dresser, the initial chill in his chest giving way to a steady burn of anger. This wasn't a random curiosity. This was deliberate. Someone had entered his private space and rifled through his life with surgical precision, and he didn't need a crystal ball to know who the intrusion was bad enough. But what rattled Harold most was the arrogance of it, the assumption that he wouldn't notice, that he was too old, too trusting, or too distracted to catch on. But Harold Jennings was none of those things. He closed the drawer carefully, leaving everything exactly as he'd found it. If Rick thought he'd gotten away with his little search, Harold intended to let him keep thinking that. It would make what came next easier. Stepping into his walk-in closet, Harold ran his palm along the top of the safe's digital lock. It still functioned, but that no longer mattered. The manual key overrode the code entirely. In Rick's hands, it could mean immediate access to everything Harold had worked for. From his savings to the heirlooms he'd promised to pass down to Megan. A man with that kind of access, and that much desperation in his eyes, could do a lot of damage before anyone knew what was missing. Harold flipped off the light and stood in the dark for a moment, listening to the faint creaks of the old house. Somewhere down the hall, a muffled voice, Megan's, floated from the guest room. No sign of Rick. Tonight, Harold told himself, was not the night to act. Tonight was the night to watch, to listen, and to plan. Because whatever game Rick was playing, Harold intended to be ready for the next move. And if Rick thought the old man in this house was an easy mark, he was in for a rude awakening. That night, Harold didn't bother pretending he could sleep. He lay on his back in the dark, hands resting lightly on his chest, eyes fixed. On the faint outline of the ceiling fan, the events of the evening replayed like a film reel. Rick's pointed questions at dinner, the open bedroom door, the missing key. Every so often, Harold's years as an investigator crept back into focus. He'd seen this pattern before, the small, accidental discoveries, the polite, probing questions, the slow mapping of routines. Rick wasn't just curious, he was casing the place. At 11:47 p.m., Harold's digital clock glowed in the darkness as the creak of a floorboard downstairs made him tense. The sound was heavier than Megan's step.
This was a deliberate, weight-conscious tread, the kind of careful movement a person makes when they don't want to be heard. He stayed
perfectly still. A few seconds later, he caught it. Rick's voice, low and hushed. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep." Harold's pulse quickened. He slid silently from bed, bare feet meeting the cool hardwood, crossed to the corner where the heating vent connected upstairs to the living room below. Over the years, he'd learned that sound sometimes, traveled up through the ductwork more clearly than through the walls. What he heard next froze him in place. "The old man's definitely loaded," Rick was saying. "I found bank statements, investment portfolios, the works. We're talking serious money here." Harold's stomach dropped. This wasn't idle talk. This was a man speaking to an accomplice. "Tomorrow night's perfect," Rick continued. "Megan's got her book club from 7 to 9, like clockwork. That gives us more than enough time." Harold reached for his phone on the nightstand and opened the voice recorder app, pressing record just as Rick's voice grew sharper. "I already have the safe key. Grabbed it earlier today while they were eating dinner. The old fool keeps everything. In their cash, jewelry, probably more account info. The guy won't even know what hit him." Harold's jaw tightened. Old fool. The words stung, not because they were insulting, but because they revealed exactly how Rick saw him, as a gullible mark, not a father dash law. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. "Look, I know you're worried about the timing, but my gambling debts aren't going away. These guys are not patient. This has to happen now." Gambling. Harold should have guessed. The late-night phone calls, the unexplained tension in Rick's shoulders, the evasive answers when asked. About job prospects, they all made sense now. Below, Rick chuckled. "The beauty is, he'll never suspect family. Even if he figures out something's missing, Megan will convince him he just misplaced it. You know how old people get about their memory?" Harold's grip tightened on the phone. He was 68, not senile. His memory was sharp enough to recall every word of this conversation, even without the recording. Rick wrapped up the call with a cold, casual line, "By Thursday, we'll be out of here. I'll tell her I got a job in another state. Something urgent. We're gone before the old man knows what hit him." My call ended. Footsteps moved back toward the front of the house. Then up the stairs, slow, measured, careful not to wake anyone. Harold slipped the phone under his pillow, feigning sleep as a shadow passed his half-open bedroom door and continued down the hall to the guest room in the silence that followed. Harold's mind was already spinning. He now had a clear timeline, a motive, and proof in Rick's own voice. But the most important realization was this. Rick wasn't just stealing from him. He was using Megan, her trust, her presence in the house, as a human shield for his crime. And that was something Harold would never forgive by morning. Had already made his decision. Rick thought he was hunting easy prey. Okay, but Harold Jennings wasn't about to play the victim. If Rick wanted a target, Harold was going to give him one. Only this target would bite back. Lying there in the dark with Rick's voice still echoing, in his head, Harold found himself rewinding to the morning 3 weeks. Earlier, when the trouble first walked through his front door, it had been a crisp Tuesday in early spring. Harold was sitting at his kitchen table with the Ashwood Gazette, nursing his second cup of coffee and half listening to the hum of the refrigerator when his phone rang. Megan's name popped up on the screen. "Morning, sweetheart," he'd answered, instantly smiling. "Dad, I know it's early," but she stopped, her breath hitching. "Rick lost his job last month. We've been trying to keep up, but we're 3 months behind on the mortgage." Harold's gut had tightened. We'd been through layoffs himself back in the 80s. He knew how quickly debt could close in. "How far behind?" he asked, already reaching for the checkbook he kept in the drawer by the fridge. "I hate asking," Megan said quickly, "but could we maybe stay with you for a while? Just until Rick finds something new?" Her voice was so full of hope and relief when he said yes that it broke his heart a little. She was 33 years old, proud as they come. Wouldn't have called unless she'd felt she had no other option. 3 days later, he arrived in a rented U-Haul, the backpack tight. With far more than a temporary stay would suggest, Megan's hug on the front porch was fierce and tearful. Rick's handshake, on the other hand, was firm but brief, and his eyes moved past Harold into the house, scanning like a man appraising a property he might one day own. "Nice place." "Harold," he'd said, strolling through the living room without waiting to be invited. "Must be worth a pretty penny in today's market." At the time, Harold brushed it off as small talk. Now, in light of what he knew, it sounded like step one in a mental inventory. During that first week, Harold had made an effort to be gracious. He cleared out space in the guest room closet, rearranged his pantry, even adjusted his morning routine so he wasn't competing for the bathroom. Megan settled in quickly. She knew the house well from her childhood, but Rick was different. He lingered in hallways, asked endless questions about the neighborhood. "When's the neighborhood watch usually out? Which neighbors are retired? Do you keep much cash at home?" Individually, the questions might have seemed harmless. Together, they painted a picture Harold now recognized all too well, someone gathering intelligence. One morning, Rick offered to drive Harold to the bank to save him a trip while he was on his way to update his unemployment records. Harold declined, but a few days later, when they did go together, Rick hung back just enough to watch over Harold's shoulder as he filled out a deposit slip. He'd even asked, in what Harold now recognized as a too casual tone, "You ever use one of those safe deposit boxes? Bet you've got some interesting stuff tucked away." The signs had been there. Harold just hadn't wanted to see them. The mail had been another red flag. Envelopes from credit card companies and collection agencies started arriving for Rick, each one marked with urgent language. Final notice. Account past due. Immediate response required. Megan never seemed to notice, or perhaps Rick intercepted most of them, but Harold caught enough to realize there was more going on than a simple job loss. And yet, for Megan's sake, he'd kept his suspicions to himself. In her husband, she trusted him, and Harold wanted to believe in him, too, if only because it meant believing his daughter hadn't made a terrible mistake. But all those ignored warning signs now felt like weights pressing on his chest. Rick's sly glances, his casual comments about valuables, his quiet disappearing acts during the day, they were all puzzle pieces Harold had set aside. The phone call he'd overheard the night before had snapped the picture into sharp focus. Rick hadn't stumbled into hard times and bad judgment. He'd walked a straight, deliberate path toward this house, toward Harold's safe, toward the life savings Harold had built over decades. And in less than 24 hours, Harold did nothing. Rick planned to take it all and drag Megan with him into whatever pit of gambling debt he'd dug. Harold closed his eyes, took a long, steady breath, and let the investigator in him take over. The days of giving Rick the benefit of the doubt were over. Now, it was time to protect his daughter, his home, and himself. The next move would be his, and Rick would never see it coming. By the time dawn broke over Ashwood, Harold had already mapped out his response. 30 years as an insurance investigator had taught him the value of preparation and the satisfaction of catching someone in the act. Rick thought he'd be walking into a clean, easy score. Harold was going to make sure it turned into the most humiliating night of his life. At 5 o'clock, While the house was still quiet, Harold moved the real safe key from its hiding place in his bedroom dresser to the kitchen junk drawer, ducking it beneath a jumble of rubber bands, twist ties, and a broken tape measure. It was the kind of spot no thief would ever think to check. Too messy. Too ordinary in its place. He planted a decoy, an old luggage key, brass-colored and just similar enough to pass for the real thing at a glance. Then came the fun part. From his basement workshop, Harold retrieved a small, spring-loaded confetti cannon he'd picked up months ago at a hardware store clearance bin. The kind meant for gender reveal parties or New Year's Eve, loud enough to startle, messy enough to make a point. He emptied the paper confetti and replaced it with a glitter mix of fine silver and gold. Anyone who triggered it would be wearing that evidence for days, no matter how hard they tried to scrub it off. The challenge was rigging it so it would only go off when someone reached deep into the drawer. The exact spot where the real key used to be. Harold adjusted the trigger sensitivity, testing with a wooden spoon until it was perfect. A casual bump wouldn't set it off. Deliberate reach would unleash the sparkling storm. By 8 a.m. The trap was armed, the decoy key in position. In the drawer looking perfectly normal. But Harold wasn't finished. He needed more than just a glitter-coated thief. He needed undeniable proof. After breakfast, when Megan offered to run to the grocery store, Harold claimed he had a few errands of his own. His first stop was the electronics aisle at the local big box store, where a young clerk named Tyler helped him pick out a compact wireless security camera with night vision and motion detection. The thing was smaller than a deck of cards, black-cased. It could stream directly to Harold's smartphone. Back home, Harold excused himself under the pretense of needing a rest and went upstairs to set it up. He tried a few locations before finding the sweet spot wedged between two books on his nightstand, angled just right to capture the dresser, the drawer, and anyone standing in front of it. Through the live feed on his phone, he adjusted until the image was crystal clear. Even the faint patterns in the carpet showed up under night vision. The motion sensor was sensitive enough to kick on when someone entered the room, but not so twitchy that shadows or the creak of the house would trigger false alarms. Asterisk by the time Megan returned with groceries. Everything was in place. The glitter trap armed, the camera rolling, and the bait key gleaming just enough to catch Rick's greedy eye at lunch. Harold made sure to drop a few casual lines into the conversation, playing the part of the forgetful. "Old man, I think I'll turn in early tonight," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Didn't sleep too well last night. Might even take one of those strong sleeping pills." Rick's face barely moved, but Harold caught the flicker in his eyes. The calculation. The confirmation after the table was cleared. Harold headed upstairs, pausing halfway to glance back. Rick was leaning against the counter, watching him go, his expression unreadable. But Harold didn't need to read it. He knew exactly what Rick was thinking. Let him think tonight would be easy. Let him believe the key was right where he'd found it before. What Rick didn't know was that when he reached for that key, he'd be pulling the pin on his own downfall, and Harold would be watching every glitter-covered second. The next morning, Harold came downstairs to find Megan in her robe, pouring coffee, and Rick leaning casually against the counter with that easygoing grin he put on when he wanted to look harmless. Harold knew better now. He slid into his chair at the kitchen table, set down the morning paper, and started in on his eggs and toast like any other day. The trick was to make Rick think nothing had changed, that Harold was still the trusting, slightly tired old man Rick believed him to be. "So, what's on the agenda today?" Rick asked, taking a sip of coffee. Double quotes? "Oh, just odds and ends," Harold replied, keeping his tone light. "Might run to the hardware store, maybe the bank." The mention of the bank, Rick's eyes sharpened for a fraction of a second before his smile returned. "Everything okay financially?" he asked, pretending concern. Megan chuckled softly. "Dad's old-fashioned. Likes to check his accounts in person instead of online. Says it's safer." Harold smiled faintly. Not paranoid. Careful. "Can't be too careful these days?" "Absolutely," Rick said, leaning forward. especially for a man living alone. You never know what could happen. You did say you keep important documents in that safe upstairs, right? Harold gave a small shrug. Some things, yes. And after a pause, he added, and I usually sleep like the dead these days, especially when I take one of those prescription sleep aids. That last part was a lie, of course, but he watched Rick absorb it like a sponge. His posture eased just slightly, as if the mental math had shifted in his favor. That's good, Rick said, too casually. You've got to get your rest at your age, Charlie, Megan scolded gently. No, Harold said, waving it off with a chuckle. He's right. By the time I'm in bed, I'm out cold until morning. The message was clear enough. Tonight will be no different. You'll have all the time you need. After breakfast, Rick announced he had job calls to make, disappearing into the den with his phone. Megan went upstairs to organize a few things. Harold seized the moment to step outside, pretending to check the mailbox, but really just giving Rick time to think he was alone with the upstairs key location. When Harold came back inside, Rick was standing in the kitchen with a bottle of water, looking as though he'd just wandered in by chance. You know, he said casually, I might stay up late tonight, watch a little TV. I'm kind of a night owl. Suit yourself, Harold replied, feigning indifference. Remotes on the coffee table. By early evening, Harold could feel the tension humming beneath the surface. Megan was curled up on the couch with a book, while Rick checked his phone every few minutes like a man counting down to something. At 8 o'clock, Harold stretched deliberately and rubbed his temples. Long day, he murmured. Think I'll turn. And early tonight, Rick's head came up immediately. Actually, Harold, I was thinking maybe we could have a drink together first. Father and son-in-law bonding time. That's sweet, Megan said, eyes still on her book. Rick mentioned a bottle of top-shelf whiskey Harold kept in the kitchen. Harold declined politely, citing his blood pressure medication. Rick pressed once, twice, even bringing in an empty glass for just a splash. The persistence confirmed it. Rick wanted something in Harold's system to make sure he'd be out for the night. Harold finally smiled and said, You know what? I think I'll take one of those sleeping pills instead. They knock me right out until morning. Rick's relief was almost visible. That's perfect. You need your rest. As Harold climbed the stairs, moving slowly, he called back over his shoulder, Don't stay up too late. Rick smiled. Ain't dreams. Harold. Inside his room, Harold locked eyes with the hidden camera's tiny lens, checked the glitter trap one last time, and settled in the shadows to wait. Tonight, Rick thought the game was his to win, but Harold knew the scoreboard was about to change. The old farmhouse clock downstairs had just finished chiming 2 when Harold's phone screen glowed faintly on the nightstand. 2:43 a.m. He'd been lying motionless for hours, watching the live feed from the hidden camera on and off. His breathing slow and even, every muscle disciplined into stillness. The hallway outside his room was dark, except for the faint amber glow from a nightlight down by the stairs. Then came the sound, a careful, deliberate step on the 3rd stair from the top. Rick had learned exactly where the house creaked during his 3-week stay, and he was avoiding every telltale spot. Harold's half-open door gave him a narrow slice of view into the hallway. A shadow shifted, pausing just outside. Rick was listening, probably counting out the seconds to be sure the sleeping pill had done its job. The doorknob turned slowly, silently, until the door eased inward. Rick slipped inside, a dark figure. Dressed in black from head to toe, he moved with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Through the camera feed on Harold's phone, he could see Rick cross the carpet, heading straight for the dresser. He bypassed the top drawers without even glancing, going directly to the second one down, the one where he'd found the real safe key weeks ago. Rick pulled it open. For a heartbeat, his shoulders squared with triumph. The decoy key gleamed. In the low light, right where he expected it, he reached in with a greedy certainty, fingers stretching toward it, and that's when the room erupted. Boom. The glitter cannon exploded with a sharp, festive crack that echoed through the bedroom like a 4th of July firecracker. A shimmering cloud of gold and silver burst upward, coating Rick from head to toe in less than a second. It clung to his hair, face, and clothes. the ultrafine particles catching the light and making him look like some deranged, walking Christmas ornament. Son of a... Rick staggered backward, cursing, batting at his face as the glitter swirled around him. Harold, executing the performance he'd been rehearsing all day, jerked upright in bed and fumbled for the lamp. What on earth? Ah! The light clicked, on revealing Rick in all his glittering disgrace, standing next to the open drawer, holding the useless decoy key in his hand. His eyes were wide, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What are you doing in my bedroom?" Harold asked, his voice pitched with perfect confusion. I heard a noise, glitter still, falling from his hair onto the carpet. Thought somebody was breaking in? At 3 a.m, into my dresser? Before Rick could reply, there were quick footsteps in the hall. Megan appeared in the doorway, tying her robe, her eyes darting between her glitter-covered husband and her father sitting upright in bed. "What? What happened?" she asked, her voice tight. Rick tried to speak, but the words tumbled out incoherently. It's some kind of trap. It just went off." Megan's gaze shifted to the open drawer. "Why were you in Dad's dresser?" "I was looking for something to help him sleep." He was tossing and turning. Harold kept his tone mild. "Megan, my medicine is in the bathroom cabinet. Always has been." The silence that followed was thick. Rick looked cornered, glitter sparkling accusingly under the lamplight. "You left our bed," Megan said slowly, "to search?" "My father's bedroom in the middle of the night. For medicine you knew wasn't there?" Rick's jaw tightened, but no believable excuse came. From Harold's perspective, the trap had already done its work, not just coating Rick in physical evidence, but forcing him into a corner where the truth was the only way out. And the truth, Harold knew, was about to hit Megan harder than any glitter bomb could. Rick's excuses were collapsing faster than the glitter was settling on Harold's carpet. Megan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression shifting. "From confusion to suspicion, Rick," she said, her voice low but edged with steel. "Why are you standing in my father's bedroom at 3 a.m, covered in... what is that?" "It's some kind of security device," he said quickly. "No?" Brushing at his sparkling clothes, sending another cascade of gold and silver to the floor. "It just went off when I opened the drawer." "And why," Megan pressed, "were you opening the drawer?" Rick hesitated, his mouth working but producing nothing that sounded remotely believable. I told you. I was looking for something to help him sleep." He was tossing and turning. Harold kept his voice mild, almost gentle. "Megan, my medicine is in the bathroom cabinet. It's been there for years." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Megan's eyes narrowed as she took in the open drawer, the decoy key in Rick's hand, and the glitter sticking to every inch of him. "So let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You left our bed in the middle of the night, came into my father's room while he was asleep, and started rummaging through his private dresser. For something you knew wasn't there?" Asterisk Rick's voice rose defensively. "Why are you interrogating me? I'm your husband." Megan took a step back like his words had pushed her physically away. "You're right, you are my husband. That is why I'm asking you to tell me the truth right now." Rick opened his mouth to speak, but Harold knew this was the moment. Megan didn't need another lie, she needed the truth. He reached for his phone on the nightstand and unlocked it with deliberate care. "There's something you need to hear," Harold said, his eyes locked on his daughter's. Rick's head whipped toward him, his face paling beneath the glitter. Don't what?" Megan snapped, her voice sharper now. "Whatever he thinks he heard," Rick began, but Megan cut him off. "Be quiet, Rick. Dad, play it." Harold tapped the screen and the recording from 2 nights earlier. "Filled the room?" Rick's voice, low and certain. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep. The old man's definitely loaded. I found bank statements, investment portfolios, the works." Megan's face went still, her eyes fixed on her husband, like she was seeing him for the first time. "Tomorrow night's perfect. Megan's got her book club from 7 to 9. Gives us plenty of time." Rick took a step forward. "Megan, please, shut up," she said, her voice flat and cold. The recording continued. I already have the safe key. Grabbed it earlier today while they were having dinner. Old fool keeps everything in there. Cash, jewelry, probably more account info. Megan's hand flew to her mouth. You took his key? Then came the final blow. Look, I know you're worried about the timing, but my gambling debts aren't going away. These guys aren't exactly patient. This has to happen now. Gambling debts? Megan's voice cracked, then hardened. What gambling debts, Rick? Rick's shoulders slumped. It's not what it sounds like. It's exactly what it sounds like, Harold said quietly. The recording rolled on, delivering the part Harold knew would seal the coffin, even if he figures out something's missing. Megan will convince him he just misplaced it. You know how old people get about their memory? Megan looked at Rick like he was a stranger. You were going to rob my father, and then you were going to use me to cover for you. Rick started to reach for her, but she stepped back sharply. Don't touch me. Don't even look at me. Pack your things and get out. Asterisk Megan, now. Her voice rang through the room, leaving no room for argument. For a moment, Rick just stood there, glitter still clinging to his hair and skin, his mouth opening and closing like he might try one last plea. But whatever he saw in Megan's expression, cold, Harold sat quietly, letting the weight of the truth settle. Rick had underestimated him, but worse, he'd underestimated Megan. And now, the man who thought he was the predator was heading out of the house like a beaten stray, glitter marking. Every step, Rick didn't say another word. He stomped down the hall, trailing glitter like breadcrumbs, and slammed the guest room door. For the next 10 minutes, sound of drawers yanked open and clothes shoved into bags echoed through the quiet house. Megan sat in the chair by Harold's bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The initial shock on her face had hardened into something else, not just anger, but a kind of clarity Harold had seen only a few times in his life. It was the look of someone who'd finally seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. I'm so sorry, Dad, she said quietly. I brought him here. I put you in danger. Harold reached over and patted her hand. Sweetheart, you couldn't have known. And you're not the one who needs to be apologizing tonight. Rick appeared in the doorway again, 2 duffel bags slung over his shoulders. Glitter still sparkled stubbornly in his hair and clung to the knees of his jeans.
Again?
Didn't look at him. Leave your house key on the kitchen counter, she said, her voice level. And don't contact me. My lawyer will contact yours. Rick hesitated, his eyes flicking to Harold. This is your fault, old man. You turned her against me. No, Megan said, standing now. You did that yourself when you planned to steal from my father and lied to me for months. Now get out. The fight drained out of him then. Without another word, he trudged down the stairs. A minute later, the front door slammed, and his car started in the driveway. The sound faded into the distance until there was nothing left but the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. For the first time in weeks, Harold felt the tension in his shoulders ease. Megan stayed with him that night, sleeping in her old bedroom. The next morning, over coffee, she asked softly, Can I stay here for a while, just until I figure things out? This is your home, Harold said, for as long as you want it. In the weeks that followed, Megan moved her belongings out of the apartment she'd shared with Rick. The divorce papers were filed quickly. With $47,000 in gambling debt and a clear recording of his planned theft, Rick didn't bother contesting anything. 3 months later, Harold found himself enjoying a quiet morning at the kitchen table, reading the Ashwood Gazette while Megan, dressed in her new work clothes for her job at the local library, poured herself coffee. Big day at the library? Harold asked. Story time at 10, she said with a smile. Then I'm helping Mrs. Patterson trace her family tree. Honestly, Dad, I love it there. Peaceful, everyone's kind, no drama. She grabbed her bag, then paused at the door. Thank you for protecting me, and for handling everything so elegantly. After she left, Harold refilled his mug and let the quiet sink in. The house felt different now. Lighter, warmer. No more watching his back in his own home. No more pretending not to notice someone. Measuring the value of his life in dollars and assets, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mrs. Henderson down the street. Heard about your little home security trick? Think you could help me set one up? Harold chuckled aloud. Maybe he should patent the idea, the confetti cannon criminal catcher. It wasn't just effective, it was satisfying. Outside, spring had settled over Ashwood. The neighborhood was quiet again, the way it had been before Rick's short-lived invasion. Harold sipped his coffee, feeling the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you listen to your instincts. Set the right trap and let a man reveal his own true colors. Sometimes justice comes from the courts. Sometimes it comes from the police, and sometimes comes covered in gold and silver glitter. In the weeks after Rick's glitter-covered exit, Harold's home returned to its natural rhythm. Quiet mornings with coffee, the sound of birds outside the window, and evenings where trust filled the air instead of suspicion. Megan found her footing again, starting fresh at the library. And Harold watched her slowly shed the weight of betrayal. It struck Harold how close he had come to losing more than just valuables. Trust, once broken, is far harder to replace than any piece of jewelry or a stack of cash. The experience had reminded him, and now Megan, that danger doesn't always come with a mask or in the dark of night. Sometimes it walks in smiling, holding your hand, calling you family. Life protecting what matters isn't just about locking doors or installing cameras. It's about listening to your instincts. Even when your heart wants to believe otherwise, trust is precious, and once you give it away, must be certain it's in the right hands. So, if you've ever had to stand your ground, protect your home, or defend someone you love from those who pretended to care, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you believe in stories where the good guys win, where justice might be served with a dash of glitter, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your next favorite story is just one click away.